Hello and welcome to what might honestly be the craziest how I paint things I have ever done. Now this here is the Bob Semple Tank, which is a legend both in New Zealand and parts beyond, as a stopgap measure introduced during World War II, at the very outbreak of war with Japan, when New Zealand had no hope of supply from Britain or America at the time, and Japanese naval power in the Pacific was at its zenith. So we were really concerned, as one can imagine, that there had to be some kind of provision for local defence. Enter Bob Semple. He was the Minister for Railways and Public Works, and he had a cunning plan to drop armoured superstructures onto farming equipment and turn them into tanks. Now, if you want the complete story, I'll make sure that the history in miniature I've just done on this same tank is linked down below. But without any further mucking around, let's get to painting it. So before we even get to the stage of priming this monstrosity, I need to clear up something I'd said in a previous video, where I called this a little tank. I've got here a 28mm figure from Bolt Action. Let's just sidle him up against the side there. This thing was 12 feet tall. The superstructure was enormous. So where previously I'd been concerned about how would 6 men fit in this beast, yeah, tank design, I'm sure they'd fit. That would be fine. Now, when it comes to priming it, we need to talk a little bit about the camo that it might have been deployed in. Now, trying to get an accurate read from colorized photos is quite difficult, but we know that it did have some kind of camouflage applied, probably just to look cool as it went parading through the streets. So what I'm going to do is base this off of a common camouflage pattern at the time, try and follow the pattern that was visible in some of the photographs of the period, and yeah, prepare this thing for war. Absolute monstrosity. So this is a resin print. This is 1/56 scale, so suitable for bolt action, chain of command, that sort of game. I have seen resin kits available online for 1/100 and 1/72 scale, but 1/56, the only versions I've found have been STLs. So if you do find a big Bob, make sure, do drop a link in the description. That'd be really helpful to folks. Now I've popped off the turret and put that on a cork with a little bit of blue tack and hit this with a primer spray of khaki from Vallejo. This is about as close as we're going to get without having to mix anything up, and it's going to work really well. Now, as I was doing some research while this was drying, I discovered this actually had 20mm of armor where the corrugated stuff was plated over the top. So it was capable of stopping autocannon rounds. It was actually much tougher than I would have thought. What I've got is some masking tape, and I'm going to mask out, let's just put that down like that, a vague camo pattern. I'm probably going to have to tear up some of this tape, but ragged and uneven is going to be perfect. So let's just start. Oh my goodness. If I'd known what this was going to lead to. Okay, I'm going to mask off some areas that I want to be, to stay khaki. Now when applying this masking tape, what I've done is ripped and torn and made sure that there's always a ragged edge out towards the edge of any camo lines that I want to leave in that khaki color. So what I'm going to do now is go outside. I'm going to take out some Russian uniform in a spray can, and I'm going to essentially prime this a second time and see what we get. Now there is going to be a little bit of brush work required to fix this up once I've sprayed it green. I cannot get past how ridiculous this is. But yeah, that will just take a couple of seconds. Let's see what we end up with. Okay, moment of truth time. This has had plenty of time to dry. I've left this for about 20 minutes. And it's time to start peeling off. If I can. Bloody hell, where's the edge of this thing? Yeah, we'll start. Oh no, I always get nervous when I do this, eh? Like, I've done the masking camo a few times, but always there's this last second concern of, is this going to look right? And bless it, it always comes out pretty okay. Oh my god, it's the Bob Semple. Now I can't believe that worked. Yeah, I've been laughing for a good 5 minutes. But there we have it. We have the camo pattern on our Bob Semple. It is a little straight in some places, so I'm getting some khaki from the pot, and this is a job for your most ragged old brush. What I'm going to do is just jam along the edges of some of these straight parts on the armor and just rough them up a bit. So for example here, let's just khaki that up a little. Now once your camo has been softened around the edges as much as you'd like, I'm going to turn to Ali's Brown Liquid for my shade. Now you could use Agrax Earthshade here, but that would give you a much darker finish overall, and I don't really want that. I just want to accentuate some of the details here. There are a lot of panels after all. Now Ali's Brown Liquid, I've done a video on the past, but to catch you up, it is 2 parts of Agrax Earthshade, 2 parts of Seraphim Sepia, 1 part Lahmian Medium, and then just a few drops of Drakenhof Nightshade to help with the shading effect. So it is pretty eclectic, but it is nice and soft once it's finished. So let's go ahead and with a big old brush start applying this into our bob. Once you've applied it, you're going to want to leave this for about half an hour. Although a big old tank like this, you're probably safer to leave this for closer on an hour. Now when you're applying it, try and keep your brush moving in the same direction, and you'll find you get a much smoother finish. So these big flat areas, if I just do that with the shade, I'm going to have to come back and do less tidy up later. Now once it's had plenty of time to dry, you'll see we get lots of shading in all of the recesses. All of the rivets are shaded, but we don't have to go painstakingly pin highlighting all of this, my goodness. What we're going to do now is actually go back to Russian uniform from the pot. And we're going to overbrush this, which is similar to dry brushing, except we're not taking quite so much paint off the brush. What we want to do here is to brighten up some of that green again, and kind of re-green it a little bit, because we'll find once you've shaded this stuff with Ali's Brown Liquid or even Agrax Earthshade, you're going to get it turn a slightly orangey color, but that's okay. Just flick along areas that you want to brighten up a little. And when you come near the edges of any camo pattern, just slow down and leave a slightly ragged edge. So I'm going to do this to all of the green, all over the tank. You'll see that brightens things up again, makes that green a little more vibrant, and we still have all of our shading in the recesses, with a nice soft edge to the camo choice. What we're going to do now is exactly the same thing to the khaki, except instead of using the paint color khaki, we're actually going to go up to German Camo Beige. Now this is a little bit lighter, so we want to be fairly sparing first applying this. So let's just lightly, there we go, flick along those corrugated edges. But this is going to give us a little bit more definition between these 2 areas of color, the green and the khaki. So around we go, doing the same thing again. And you see if you pass over the same area a few times to build up the color, you can get a stronger color in the center and leave that fade towards the edges. Now, especially when it comes to flat panels like this, what you're probably going to find the easiest to do is throw your brush to the ground and then jab on a little bit of color with the tip. It helps if you've got a wedge tip brush to do this. And then scrub it around in a little circle. So jab, 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 where you want the color to be, and then soften it with a quick swizzle of your brush. Now, same as with the green, that helps add a little bit more definition back to our tank, and that's looking pretty cool. There is one last thing I want to do to the armor though, and for this I've got one of my bigger brushes out of that makeup brush set, and I'm going to use just a tiny, tiny wee speck of dark sand, and then really make sure that I am working most of it out of this brush. So give me a second here. Now here you'll see I haven't bothered painting the underside, but that's because nobody's ever going to destroy this thing. I'm using the tracks here as a place to see how much of this dark sand I'm going to leave behind. And I am very lightly flicking along their edges and picking up just a tiny amount there, which is perfect. What I'm going to do now is dry brush both green and khaki very lightly to add just a little bit more towards the edges of any detail. So when I come up to the edge of plates, I'll spend a few seconds here just dry brushing that edge. And I'm going to do that around all of the areas of detail on our fearsome Bob Semple Tank. Now take some time to build out that color, and what you'll have is all of your rivets and edges highlighted with the shading remaining intact. And I find that quite a good color for any sort of green or khaki. So it's perfect in this instance. What we're going to do now is move on. That's the armor done. So we need to paint the weapons and the tracks. So I'm going to pop the turret off, and we'll start off by painting the Bren guns and the ball mounts with a little bit of German gray. And we're going to use an ordinary brush for this. And with all of the Bren mounts painted, you can then move on to the tracks. Now a flat edge brush is going to help you a lot here, because you can just slide across the top very quickly and simply. When you come near the edge, just take your time, slow down a little. Now at last, as if by magic, it actually looks like a tank. Hooray! What I've got is a little oily steel, and still one of my little makeup brushes, because we're going to dry brush the tracks. Now it's up to you. You could go ahead and dry brush the... Actually, you know what? I am going to do just a little bit of oily steel on the jackets of the weapons there, just to make them stand out a bit. But otherwise, we're just going to lightly flick edges of these tracks. And particularly, you can just do towards the edges. You don't need to worry about getting right up under the thing. You're not going to see it. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, yeah, I'd suggest that doing the machine gun mountings is a nice little touch. What I have here is a little bit of red leather, and I've watered this down until it is only slightly thicker than a shade. I'd suggest if you're doing this for the first time, it's okay to water it down too much and then come back to give it a second coat. But we're going to use this to just paint into some recesses a little bit of a rusty color. Real tanks, they would likely have not had much of this on them because, of course, maintenance. But we want to have, there's no markings on this tank. There's not a lot of variety in its appearance. So having a little bit that we can do to just make that stand out a bit more, we can do more to it to have some fun. So just a few areas, add a little bit of this. Concentrate in areas where you'd see natural rust build up. Now make sure that you're washing your tracks with it as well. Once it dries, it's way more subtle, but it is still possible to go overboard with it. So, like I said, start with more water than you might think, and once it's dry, if you want to come back and strengthen the color, you can give it a second coat. The last thing I'm going to do, I have here a little brown sand, and I've worked most of this out of my old brush here, and I'm going to lightly just poke and jab at the bottom of the vehicle here to simulate some road dust. Now, this will take a little bit of time to build up, and same as with everything, you don't really want to go nuts with this, but I'm going to go about halfway up the superstructure here and a little further up the front. Now you see there, it doesn't take much to get that effect. I'd say you want to go a little easy on this rather than go overboard, but it does add just a little bit more visual interest to what is a big angry shed. Anyhow, what I'm going to do now is take this bad boy outside, hit it with a matte varnish. I'm going to use Vallejo's matte spray for this, and let's get a look at our finished Bob Semple Tank. And there it is at last, the Caterpillar D8 Armored Tractor, or the Bob Semple Tank. And as Bob himself put it at the time, that tank was an honest-to-God attempt to do something with the materials we had available where the raiders were at our back door. It really does capture an insane element of the Kiwi spirit to do something rather than sit on your thumbs when things are going wrong. And though it would probably not have done terribly well in combat, it's a spectacle. And if it's the sort of thing that you like the look of, there are links to STLs in the description, as well as rules where you can use it in bolt action. It's probably pretty well balanced due to the fact that it will fall apart if anybody gives it a dirty look, but get a couple of those machine guns firing and your enemy's in trouble. So thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who keep me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Fred, and Jimmy. Without your support, this insanity would not have been possible. So take that as a warning, if you like. As always, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comments box below. And remember to check out the History in Miniature, where I talk about the complete story of the Bob Semple, how it came to be, and that will also be linked at the end here. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.